Hello, students. A very good afternoon. So, before we start this session, we're going to talk about human reproduction, but I would like to launch a technical poll so that we know the audio and video is clear. So, please give me an answer, students, if it's okay. If I'm audible, perfect. Thank you. So, myself, Vinay Anand. So, I'll be taking this class, a crash course class on human reproduction. Okay. So we all have already studied this chapter for our board examination and a lot in our 12th standard. So let's have a quick revision about what are the important points that we have to remember for the examination. Okay. So in this chapter, first we have to talk about the anatomy of both male reproductive system as well as female reproductive system and some of the physiological aspects of gametogenesis. And then we have fertilization, implantation, and childbirth. Okay. So to start with the chapter, so we know that reproduction is one of the important process that has to happen in our living organisms. The reason is very simple. It's because no organism can be, it cannot be immortal. So that is why it always aims to transfer its character from one generation to other generation to keep its, species or to keep its characteristics alive as far as possible. And that is when the reproduction was born. And sexual reproduction is very, very important because it brings us variation. Okay, it helps in evolution and bringing new characteristics so that the young ones can adapt, right? So when it comes to human beings, we are sexually reproducing viviparous organisms because we give directly births to the young ones, and we are mammals. So the mother milks the baby. That's why we are mammals. So human reproduction can be, reproductive system can be divided into two. One is male reproductive system, other one is female reproductive system. So what happens is the reproductive system is very, very important in most of the phases of our life. So we know that our life cycle can be divided into three phases. One is juvenility, reproductive phase, and senescence phase. In juvenility, we just develop our muscles and organs and become stronger. Whereas when it comes to reproductive phase, we have a very important developments that is happening in our body, which is called as secondary sexual development or secondary sexual characteristics that develops. So the development of secondary sexual characteristics is solely depending upon our reproductive organs, right? So, for example, once our testes and the ovaries become active, they produce these androgens, which directly influence some of the secondary sexual characteristics like development of muscles, the hair growth, okay, development of mammary glands in female, okay, broadening of shoulders in male, okay, broadening of pelvis in female, and even the pelvic bone of the female becomes more elastic and broad. Okay, the voice changes, right? The puberty, it hits and the voice changes. For the male, it becomes deep, whereas the female, it is high pitched and shrill. Whereas breathing, we breathe more or abdomen. So abdomen becomes very. You can see that there's a lot of muscles. Female develop less muscles, and the hair development is less in females, whereas more in male. Facial hair, okay, and hair in the armpits and the pubic regions can be seen as a signs of secondary sexual development or characteristics because of the release of this sexual hormones. Now, when it comes to reproductive organs, we can divide them into three different parts. One is primary sex organs, secondary sex organs, and accessory sex organs. So in males, our primary sex organs are pair of testes, and our secondary sex organs are prostate, seminal vesicle, vas deferens, epididymis, and penis are the secondary sex organs, and we have no accessory sex organs. Okay, and the chest is an inactive breast, I can tell. Okay, when it comes to females, they have pair of ovaries as primary sex organs, and the secondary sex organs include fallopian tube, uterus, vagina, and mammary glands. Okay, and accessory glands can be considered as breast or mammary glands. Okay, so to reach the female, right? I'm so sorry, guys. My network got cut. So anyways, we didn't talk much, anything significant. I hope I can continue. So if you have any problems, please let me know in the chat box. Okay. So let's go. So male reproductive system consists of a pair of testes, and the pair of testes is present in a sac-like structure called a scrotum. So we know that by birth only, the testis has already descended from the abdomen region into the scrotum. Okay, so this descending is very, very important. Okay, if the testes do not descend properly during the childbirth, okay, or during the 5th month, the testis actually descends into the scrotum. If this descending do not take place, a lot of defects starts occurring in the male. Okay, so it can lead to testicular cancer, it can lead to sterility. Okay, so this is called as cryptorchidism. So the failure of descending of testis is called as cryptorchidism. So surgically they are descended into the testis for the people which do not descend. So the reason why the testis is in the outside sac called scrotum is because it maintains around 2 to 3 degrees Celsius lesser than the body temperature, so which is essential for the spermatogenesis. Now, if you see the testes are held together by 2 important sets of muscles. You have to remember, one is dartus muscles. Okay, one is called as dartus. Okay, dartus muscles. Other one is called as cremaster. Okay, cremaster. Okay, cremaster muscles. Cremaster muscles are like net. Okay, imagine that the testes are held, covered by a net, and dartus muscles are something like this. Okay, if this is the testis, so the dartus muscles come like this. Okay, these are dartus muscles. So these both muscles, dartus and cremaster muscles, what they do is they help in ascending or descending of the testis based on the external environment. If it is too cold, the testis will ascend and closer to the abdomen so that it becomes warmer. If it is too hot, the testis will descend downward, and the scrotum also becomes loose so that it cools down, okay, and reduces the temperature. And this temperature is very essential because it promotes spermatogenesis. Now, coming to some of the important organs. with related to male reproductive system. So as primary sex organs, we have paired testis. As accessory glands, we have retitestis, vasa efferentia, epididymis, and vas deferens. As accessory glands, we have prostate glands, seminal vesicles, and we have Cowper's glands or bulbourethral glands. Okay, and we have external genitalia as penis. So let us go and study the structure of the testis. So a male has a pair of testes, we know that. And when we take the cross section of the testis, for example, if this is the testis and we take a cross section of the testis, we can see that the testis is made up of two layers, people. So we have one layer is called as tunica. These are called as tunica layers. Okay. So this is called as tunica, tunica vaginalis. Okay. This is called as tunica vaginalis. And this is called as tunica, okay, tunica albuginea. Okay. Tunica albuginea. Now, what happens with tunica albuginea? The tunica albuginea divides the testis into compartments called as testicular septum. Okay, this is called as septum. Okay, so this testicular septum, which is formed by the albuginea, it divides the testis further into compartment-like structures. We know that, right? The testis is divided into numerous, around 200 lobes are present in your each testis. So these lobes are called as testicular lobules. Correct, right? So these testicular lobules, in each of the testicular lobules, you have around 2 to 3 highly coiled. You can see here 2 to 3 highly coiled, okay, structures called as seminiferous tubules. So the seminiferous tubules are 2 to 3 in number, okay, and they're very, very long and they're highly coiled within each of the lobule. So if you look at the seminiferous tubule, they are majorly made up of two important type of cells. One is called as Sertoli cells, okay. Other one is called as male germ cells, right? Male germ cells. So if you see Sertoli cells are very, very important because they are like nurse cells. They also monitor whether the sperms have to be produced. The birth of the sperms and the death of the sperms are done by Sertoli cells. They release some of the factors that help spermiogenesis as well as spermatogenesis, and they also nourish the sperm. So this is the role of Sertoli cells. Male germ cells, okay, they undergo spermatogenesis and they produce, sperms. Okay, so this is about the cells that are present in the seminiferous tubule. So between the spaces that are present in the testicular lobules, which we call it as interstitial spaces, so these spaces are filled by blood vessels, lymphatic tissue, nerve tissue, and also some of the important cells called as interstitial cells, or it is also called as Leydig, okay, Leydig cells. So these interstitial cells or Leydig cells, excuse me, okay, so I'll write it here, okay, Leydig cells, okay. So the Leydig cells or the interstitial cells, they're important because they produce androgens or testosterone, which is very, very effective for spermatogenesis, development of secondary sexual characteristics in male, etc. Okay, so this is about testis. Now, the sperms are produced in the seminiferous tubule. Now, from the seminiferous tubule, you can see here, right? From the seminiferous tubule, the sperms are transferred down into a wider retitestis. Okay, so from retitestis, it opens up. Okay, in the exterior, you can see on the posterior surface of the testis, you have something called as epididymis. Here, epididymis is highly convoluted. Okay, it contains your, here what happens, maturation of the sperms happens in the epididymis. From epididymis, the sperms are transferred to vas deferens. Okay, so the retitestis, epididymis, vas deferens, okay, they all make up your accessory ducts of your male reproductive system. Now the vas deferens from the scrotum, it ascends upward. Anteriorly it goes upward. Okay, now what does it do? It goes, this is the abdomen, right? So this is the abdomen. It goes until the abdomen through the inguinal canal. We call this as inguinal canal. Through the inguinal canal, it loops over the, you can see here. What is there here? you have the ureter, right? So it looks over the ureter. If these are the ureters, it looks over the ureter, and then it punches or it enters our urinary bladder, but it does not go to the urinary bladder. It enters through. Okay, there is an ampulla. See, this is your seminal vesicle. Okay, people, this is your seminal vesicle. Let's say so. Seminal vesicle, they project the conical structure. Okay, they project something like conical structure. So these conical structures are called as ampulla. So seminal ampulla we call it as. So these seminal ampulla, they receive our sperm duct or vas deferens from the exterior to the interior. Okay, so these ducts are closed and do not mix up with urine. That is very, very obvious. So these ducts, the seminal ducts, take into the seminal vesicles. Okay, so through the seminal vesicle, the same vas deferens, okay, it extends. Okay, the vas deferens extends through seminal vesicle, prostate ducts, and finally it becomes a common duct called as urethra. Okay, through urethra it becomes an ejaculatory duct, and the sperms are transferred outside. So this is about the duct system and the cross section of the testis. Now coming to the important accessory glands, we have seminal vesicle, prostate glands, and bulbourethral glands. Seminal vesicles are important because they'll produce seminal plasma, which is very rich in fructose and helps in as a source of nutrition for the mitochondria present in our sperms, which helps in motility. Okay, and it also has calcium ions. Next, when it comes to prostate glands are helpful for capacitation of the sperms in the vagina. So they have the properties of anticoagulants and decoagulants. So it helps in adjustment of the sperms in the vaginal environment. When it comes to bulbourethral glands or Cowper's glands, they produce this lubricant which helps in easy copulation. And bulbourethral glands secretion, it is also called as pre-ejaculate. So accidental pregnancy happens because of the bulbourethral gland secretion. Why? Because bulbourethral glands secretion are essential, and they are produced before the ejaculation to wash out all the urethra, so that there is no contaminants present. But when you have a second copulation, at the same time, there might be some sperms left in the tube. So through this bulbourethral secretions, these sperms can be carried on, and it can cause accidental pregnancy. That is why it is called as pre-ejaculate, and it should be taken care of. Now, coming to the external genitalia of the male, external genitalia of the male consists of penis, and the penis has three sets of pillar-like muscles. Okay, we have corpus spongiosum and corpus cavernosum. Corpus cavernosum are the lateral muscles, and corpus spongiosum is present in the medium or in the center. So if you see the cross section of the penis, so if you take the cross section of the penis like this, so here is the spongiosum, and these two sets of muscles are called as cavernosum. So they have tissues which are made up of erectile tissue. So the erection of the penis depends upon how much blood flow is happening into the penis. If there is more blood flow because of vascular dilation, so the blood will fill up the empty spaces between this erectile tissue and it enlarges. Okay. If it is less, it will retract. Okay. And the penis will constrict. So that is about, erection of the penis and the muscles that are present in the penis, corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum. The entire penis is covered by a loose flappy skin called as foreskin, okay, which protects the external genitalia of a male. Okay, so some of the disorders of the male reproductive system are, first one is sterility. A person will lack the ability to produce, sperms which have the capacity to fertilize an egg. So that is called as sterility. And other one is called as oligospermia. Oligospermia is when you have a low sperm count. So that is less than 20 million sperms, okay, per ml. So that is called as oligospermia. And then we have azoospermia. Either the sperms are absent, okay, or they are nearly there, it's not at all there, or they don't have the proper motility. So this is called as azoospermia. And then we have defective sperms. That is, out of 100% of the sperms, we should have at least 60% of the sperms which look like sperms, right? So 40% are defect normally in a healthy man. If it is even worse than that, then it is defective sperms and it will lead to a lot of deformities. Next one is impotence, that is erectile dysfunction. A man will not have the capacity to cause a erection, which can be good enough for penetration or copulation. So that is called as erectile dysfunction. So these are the disorders of male reproductive system. Okay. So coming to female reproductive system, we know that the primary sex organs are ovaries. Okay. And then these there are accessory organs such as uterus, vagina. Okay. And then we have ducts, which includes fallopian tube, uterus, vagina. They all act like ducts. And then we have external genitalia, which includes labia majora, labia minora, clitoris, mons pubis, hymen. Okay, so these are the external genitalia of the female. So coming to, you can see here, so we have a pair of ovaries, and the pair of ovaries are very well attached by some of the important ligaments. So these ovarian ligaments are called as ovarian ligament, round ligament, and broad ligament. So these are the three ligaments that helps in attachment of the ovary. So where is the ovary attached? Ovary are attached. One part of the ovary is attached to the, you can see here, uterus, and other part of the ovary is attached to the pelvis of the female. So these are the ligaments that support them. Okay. Now, these are the ovaries, and we have fallopian tube. Okay. And this is the uterus. And then we have the cervix and then the vagina. So let us see the cross section of the ovary. So when we take the cross section of the ovary, the cross section of the ovary again contains two layers that is called as tunical layers. We have tunica vaginalis and we have tunica albuginea. So vaginalis is outside, albuginea is inside. The outer layer is more serous and tough. So the inner layer, the albuginea, encloses something called as ovarian stroma. Okay, ovarian stroma. The ovarian stroma can be divided into two important regions. What are those regions? Ovarian cortex. Okay, ovarian cortex, and we have ovarian medulla. Okay, ovarian medulla. So when you see the cortex region is in the periphery or in the borders of the ovary, where the oogenesis and the follicular genesis is happening. When you look at the medulla, medulla contains blood vessels, lymphatic tissue, okay, and all the nerves that are present in the medullary region. Okay, so we will talk about what are the events that is happening in the cortex region, which is very, very essential with respect to oogenesis and follicular genesis. Now, coming to the duct system of the female reproductive system, we have two fallopian tubes or fallopian ducts. So the fallopian tube has three important regions. So the conical portion or the wide region, which has finger-like projections. So this is called as infundibulum. So the finger-like projections that is present in the infundibulum is called as fimbriae. So they go and attach the ovary during ovulation. So they go and literally attach the ovaries during ovulation, and they collect the ova. So the ova is collected in the infundibulum, and the ova travels down the ampulla. So if the ova do not have any flagella, so if it has to travel, there are, the inner lining of the fallopian tube is made up of, okay, some of the cells which have flagella, which you call it as fallopian flagella. So you know what is flagella, right? The tail-like structures. So the beating of the fallopian flagella helps in movement of the ovary to the ampulla region. Here, at the ampulla region, the ova actually waits for the arrival of the sperms. If the sperms come here, the fertilization happens at the ampulla region. If the sperms do not come, then from the ampulla region, the unfertilized ova or the fertilized zygote travels down to the narrow. That means it becomes smaller and smaller. So this region is called as isthmus. The isthmus opens into uterus. Okay, uterus is also called as womb, and the womb is divided. Womb consists of three important layers, anatomical layers. The outermost layer is called as perimetrium. The middle layer is called as myometrium, and the innermost layer is called as endometrium. Okay, the perimetrium is serous, and it allows different ligaments, uterine ligaments, to attach to the pelvic floor and give stability for the uterus and strength for the uterus during the development of the baby. The myometrium contains large amount of blood vessels, and it contains enormous amount of smooth muscles which are contractile in nature, so that helps in childbirth. Whereas the endometrium is the layer that is deciduous layer we call, because it goes under cyclic changes. Here the endometrium, okay, it is very helpful for the process called as implantation. Okay, so now coming to the end, you can see that the uterus opens into this narrow region called as cervix. So the cervix is lined by special type of cells. Okay, so cervical cells or cervical epithelial cells. So the cervical cells, they actually produce something called as cervical mucus. So the cervical mucus, they form this plug-like structure during certain phases of your menstrual cycle, or even after childbirth. For example, after the pregnancy, after the delivery of the baby, we have a period where we have lactational amenorrhea, where a person can have unprotected sex and not give birth to a baby. So how does it happen? One of the reason is cervix. The cervix will produce this mucus, which is very, very thick and does not allow the sperm to go inside. And even during the phases, okay, apart from 10 to 17 days, okay, which is a fertile period. If you see in the non-fertile period also, the cervical mucus is very, very thick, and the sperms cannot pass this barrier. Okay, this is one of the reasons that is avoiding the entry of the sperm into the uterus and the fallopian tube. So that is the importance of cervix. So when it is fertile period, usually the cervical mucus becomes very thin and allows the entry of the sperms into ovary and fallopian tube. Okay, now we have vagina. So the vagina have elastic muscles. Okay, so these elastic muscles can expand many times their normal size. So they are the place that helps in copulation. Okay, this is the region of copulation. So the vagina, it produces lactic acid. Okay, that gives, okay, the vagina, the vagina is having a lot of microorganisms called as vaginal microflora. It produces lactic acid, which is responsible for the acidic environment of your vagina. So that is why this lactic acid is responsible for antimicrobial properties, and it protects the vagina, and it also produces mucus that helps in copulation and movement of sperms. Okay, is it understood, kids? Can we move further? Give me a thumbs up. Guys, are you understanding? Okay. Can we move further? Yes, no? Chalo. If you have any doubts or if you want me to repeat something, please let me know. Okay. So we talked about the vagina, we talked about cervix, we talked about the uterus, we talked about fallopian tubes. Okay. And we also talked about the cross section of the ovary. Now we have to talk about the external genitalia. As I said, external genitalia of a female consist of labia majora, labia minora, clitoris, and then we have hymen layer. Labia majora and mons pubis, obviously. Mons pubis is just above the pubical bone, okay? And it consists of the lower, it consists of smooth muscles and enormous amount of fat. So this is the region where the pubic hair grows. So extending below the mons pubis is labia majora. Labia majora are also called as the greater lip. So they are also made up of soft muscles, and they're also made up of some of the oil and sweat glands. So they protect the inner parts of the vagina. So, and then extending from the labia majora are small labia means, the lip-like structures. So they have folds, muscular folds called as minora, which covers the entry of the vagina. And then at the anterior portion, you have urethral pore. Over the urethral pore is a finger-like projection called as clitoris. And the entry of the vagina is made up of hymen layer, which is not the determining factor for the virginity of females, because it can break at intense physical exercise, such as horse riding, high jump, okay, or dancing, or stress, etc. Okay, so this is about the female reproductive system. And when it comes to accessory glands, we have the breast or the mammary glands of a female. So there are paired mammary glands, and they help in lactation. majority of the mammary glands is filled with fat. We call it as, okay, a fat pad. And the rest of the mammary glands is divided into 15 to 20 mammary lobes. Okay. So these mammary lobes, they contain cluster of cells called as mammary alveoli. So these mammary alveoli, they secrete milk. Okay. And this milk is secreted in the lumen. Lumen means the gap, the space of the alveoli. From the, you can see here, okay, from the lumen of the alveoli, they're taken into some of the ducts. Okay. So we have mammary ampulla and we have lactiferous duct. Okay. So through this, you can see here it becomes wider and wider. Okay. So we have lactiferous ducts. Lactiferous ducts leads into a wider mammary ampulla. A wider mammary ampulla will lead into, ampulla means, I told you, it's like a funnel. Okay. So these funnels will lead into nipple. From there, the milk is sucked out by the baby. So actually, breasts are modified sweat glands. Remember this. This is very important. And the diagram of this mammary glands is very, very important for the labeling. So what do we have? We have mammary lobes and we have mammary ducts. Mammary ducts leads to mammary ampulla. Mammary ampulla leads to lactiferous duct. And through lactiferous duct, the milk is sucked by the nipple. So these four things are important. And as I told you, mammary glands are actually modified sweat glands. Okay. And in male, it is not active because of the absence of estrogen. And sometimes because of the genetic disorders, male can develop the breast, which is inactive. This is called as gynecomastia. So when it comes to the formation of gametes, this is one of the important phases of the reproductive phase, the production of gametes. So we have two types of gametes. One is spermatogenesis, other one is oogenesis. Formation of sperms is called as spermatogenesis. Formation of ova is called as oogenesis. So let us talk about spermatogenesis. So usually the spermatogenesis starts during the puberty. So during the birth, millions of during the 5 to 6 months of the fetal development, a lot of cells will differentiate into spermatogonia, and some of the spermatogonia will go under mitosis. Okay, mitosis. When they go under mitosis, they differentiate into a type of spermatogonia called as primary spermatocyte. What is significant about primary spermatocyte is when the spermatogonium undergoes mitosis, they undergo very important thing called as DNA replication. Okay, DNA replication happens at the mitosis phase when spermatogonia becomes primary spermatocytes. Now the primary spermatocytes during puberty, okay, once they eventually reach puberty, under the hormonal regulation, they undergo first meiotic division to give rise to secondary spermatocytes. Secondary spermatocytes, they complete the second meiotic division to give rise to spermatids. Spermatids are not matured sperms, they are just like normal cells. So they have to undergo differentiation to become spermatozoa. So we have a lot of process for sperm differentiation. We have cap phase, we have acrosomal phase, okay? So, and we have tail phase. So in each of these phases, important aspects of the sperms starts developing, and this is called as sperm differentiation. And the sperm differentiation will give rise to spermatozoa. Okay, so we understood like what are the different divisions that are happening in spermatogenesis. Now let us understand what is the hormone regulation of spermatogenesis. So what happens, the stimulation of hypothalamus takes place, and that stimulation happens because of two important cells. One is the levels of testosterone is stimulating the hypothalamus, and the second one is the Sertoli cells. They also release some of the factors that go and act on the hypothalamus to stop the production of the stimulants. So what happens when the hypothalamus is on or stimulated, it secretes GnRH, which is also called as gonadotrophic releasing hormones. The gonadotrophic releasing hormone acts on the anterior pituitary and it produces two gonadotrophins. One is LH, other one is FSH. LH is called as luteinizing hormones, which act on Leydig cells and help in the production of androgen that is called as testosterone. So this testosterone that is produced, it has to go and bind to the Sertoli cells. So if they have to go and bind to the Sertoli cells, so the Sertoli cells will produce a factor called as androgen binding proteins. So these androgen binding proteins helps in, okay, action of testosterone on the Sertoli cells. Okay. So then when the androgen binding protein is produced, the testosterone influences the Sertoli cell. The Sertoli cells will stimulate the spermatogenesis. If the sperms are produced too much, okay, and the testosterone levels are very, very high, now this Sertoli cells will produce something called as inhibin, which will go and tell the hypothalamus to switch it off. Okay. Similarly, when there are high levels of testosterone, the same testosterone goes and binds to the hypothalamus and tells you need to switch it off. Then the secretion of GnRH will stop and the entire process will shut down. So you can see here what is negative feedback loop of hormones in males. Why we call it as negative feedback? Once it has reached a certain level, that amount, that threshold or the volume of it will stop the production of an entire cycle. So what did I tell you? Hypothalamus, when it is stimulated, it will produce GnRH that will result in production of FSH and LH. LH acts on Leydig cells, FSH acts on Sertoli cells, correct? Now the Leydig cells will produce testosterone. Excess level of testosterone will switch off. You can see negative feedback loop, hypothalamus it will off. Now the entire process stops. Are you understanding? The same testosterone, it goes and acts on the reproductive organs, especially Sertoli cells. Okay. Now what does Sertoli cell will do? Sertoli cells, when FSH is released, follicular stimulating hormone is released, so that will make the Sertoli cells active to produce a factor called as ABP or androgen binding protein that will help with the testosterone to act on sperms for the process of spermatogenesis. Once the sperm levels increase too much, now that will really result in production of inhibin by the Sertoli cells. So these inhibin will go and bind to the hypothalamus, stopping the process of hormone production. So this loop is called as negative feedback loop. Okay, guys, did you understand? Okay, so anyways, so we have the structure of human sperm. So the structure of human sperm can be divided into three significant regions. One is the head region, other one is the middle piece region, next one is the tail region. So the head region is very important because the head region contains very narrow spear-shaped nucleus and it has very less cytoplasm. And at the anterior portion of your sperm, it contains a cap called as acrosomal cap, which contains acrosomal enzymes or hydrolytic enzymes, which is very, very important for the fertilization process. Now, who is responsible for production of acrosome? Golgi apparatus is very, very important for production of acrosome. So that is very, very important, right? So now, coming to the neck region contains a lot of mitochondria, around 200 to 250 mitochondria are present, which are helically arranged, okay? And there is also the centriole present in the middle piece, which has helped in the formation of the tail of the sperm or flagellum of the sperm. Now, when it comes to the tail is similar to that of the flagellum. It contains axial filament, like the arrangement of microtubule, and the entire sperm is covered by the plasma membrane. Okay, so the mobility of the sperms or the beating of the sperms, okay, it helps in movement towards the from vagina to the fallopian tube of the female reproductive system for fertilization. Okay, coming to oogenesis, I told you oogenesis happens in the cortical region. See, this is the cortical region of the ovary. In the cortical region, there are two important things that is happening. One is oogenesis as well as follicular genesis. So let us see what is happening here. For the oogenesis to happen, the same gonadotrophins are responsible. So what is happening when the hypothalamus is stimulated? It produces GnRH or gonadotrophic releasing hormone that results in stimulation of anterior pituitary to produce LH and FSH. So these LH and FSH, they act on the ovary for the production of estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen is very, very important because it helps in development of your endometrium, okay, and secondary sexual characteristics, etc. Whereas the progesterone is helpful, okay, in maintaining the integrity of our uterus. Are you understanding? So now, if there is overstimulation of estrogen or progesterone, they put a negative feedback loop, avoiding the excess stimulation of hypothalamus or anterior pituitary. In case if we are in the fertile period, that is 12 to 14 days, especially when there is ovulation, there is positive feedback loop. That means overproduction of these hormones will take place. That is estrogen and progesterone. Both of them are helpful for oogenesis, follicular genesis, and endometrium development to happen. Okay. So coming to oogenesis, some of the important things that we have to remember are here. So what happens is there are some of the cells during the fetal development, and these cells are almost stem cells, or your understanding. So some of the stem cells, they differentiate into oogonium. Some of the cells will differentiate into oogonial cells, and some of the cells will differentiate into special type of cortical cells called as granulosa cells. First, we'll talk about oogenesis, and then we'll follow up with follicular genesis. We have oogonia. Oogonia will undergo mitosis to increase their number. So once they increase their number, some of the oogonia, they differentiate, okay, into primary oocyte. How do they differentiate into primary oocyte? Some of the oogonia, they undergo meiosis 1, prophase 1, and they stop at diplotin. Remember this phase? Diplotin. So diplotin is the longest phase in the prophase 1 of meiosis 1. For years, this cell can stay in the diplotin stage. Okay, so it stops in the diplotin state of the prophase 1. Once the child reaches the puberty, because of the hormone regulation, now from the prophase 1, diplotin, the cycle will continue. That is, the cell division will continue. What happens to this primary oocyte? So the primary oocyte, it will finish its meiosis 1 to produce unequal division. It is an unequal division where it forms a small first polar body, and then we have a large secondary oocyte. It is an unequal cytokinesis that results in the first polar body and then a secondary oocyte. We don't know the significance of the polar body, so we'll neglect it. Now, what will happen to the secondary oocyte? The secondary oocyte will not undergo meiosis immediately. The secondary oocyte will undergo second meiosis only when the sperm, okay, touches the plasma membrane of the ova. So it is released on the secondary oocyte stage. Once the sperms make a contact, the nucleus of the secondary oocyte undergoes meiosis to produce the second polar body, and the you have your ootid. The ootid and the sperm nucleus will fuse to produce a zygote. Understood, people? So a few things that we have to remember. The ova is released at the secondary oocyte stage. That is the first thing. And the longest phase in the cell division where a cell can wait is the prophase 1 diplotin stage. Understood? So this is about oogenesis. Now coming to follicular genesis. Follicular genesis is a very, very important process. Okay. What is happening in the follicular genesis? Some of the cells called as granulosa cells, they come and surround the oocyte. Okay, usually is in the primary oocyte, and then they form this single layered cell of granulosa around this primary oocyte. This is called as primordial follicle. So the primordial follicles are millions in number. So as the child grows, the primordial follicles will reduce and their number will decrease to 40,000 or so. Okay, so once these primordial follicles, once the puberty happens, due to the hormonal regulation, what happens? These primordial follicles will be, more layers of granulosa cells. One more layer of granulosa cells surrounds these primordial follicles to become primary follicles. Understood? So the primary follicles further, okay, what will happen? Further, it will differentiate into growing follicle or secondary follicle. What is happening in secondary follicle? In secondary follicle, you can clearly see that you have two important layers. So these are called as thecal layers. One is called as theca interna, other one is called as theca externa. Are you understanding? So we have theca interna and theca externa can be easily differentiated in the secondary follicle. And in the secondary follicle, the granulosa cells will start producing estrogen. Okay, the excess amount of estrogen will start synthesizing in secondary follicle. Now what will happen? Now you have your oocyte, okay, or the ova coming at one end. okay, one end or the germ end of your Graafian follicle, you have an empty space within the Graafian follicle. So this empty space is called as antrum. The antrum is filled by a fluid that is secreted by the thecal layers called as antral fluid, and you have again theca externa and theca interna. Okay, so the fluid that is filled within the Graafian follicle is very, very important to create enough amount of pressure or hydrostatic pressure to burst out this thecal layer, resulting in ovulation. Okay, so once the ovulation happens, the remnants of these granulosa cells, they combine together. I mean, like they come together to form a functional endocrine body called as corpus luteum. So this is about the events that is happening in follicular genesis and oogenesis, and both are happening simultaneously. Okay, so let's go further. Yeah, what's the difference between spermatogenesis and oogenesis is very, very important. First thing, you have to know that there are 4 sperm produced for every division, and there is only 1 ovum produced in every division. The division here is equal, here it is unequal, resulting in the formation of polar bodies. Okay, so rest of the things are quite similar. Okay, now let us go for the phases of menstrual cycle. Now we know that what is menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle is a cyclic changes that happens in the female primates. Okay, so where the changes happens in the ovary, changes happens in the hormones, changes happens in the uterus. Okay, so this collective changes that happens in a cyclic form is called as menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle can be divided into 4 important phases. So what are these 4 important phases? Remember the days of these phases, which is very, very significant. So menstrual phase happens from day 1 to day 5, which is also called as the bleeding phase. Okay, next is followed by the follicular phase. The follicular phase is also called as proliferative phase, where the formation of the follicles will take place, as well as the proliferation of the endometrium takes place. That happens between day 5, day 13. And ovarian phase, ovulatory phase is where the ova is released on the 14th day or the mid-cycle. And then you have secretory phase or the luteal phase, where the formation of luteinizing or formation of your corpus luteum takes place, and it will produce progesterone, okay, and expects pregnancy. So these days are called as 15 to 28 days, and then again the cycle will continue. Remember the number of the days, okay, and it is quite significant. Now we already know the process of menstrual cycle, but let's have a quick glimpse at it. So coming to the changes that is happening in the uterus, we know that the endometrium is a deciduous layer. So what happens day 1 to day 5, there is menses. So because of the lack of pregnancy, there is degeneration of the endometrium lining. So that is why the cells of the endometrium, along with the mucus, blood, okay, etc., and the tissues are shed from the uterus, and it is passed as bleeding phase. So once the endometrium lining is completely deciduated, now the follicular genesis will take place. As the follicles are developing, they produce estrogen. So that will influence in the formation of what? Regeneration of endometrium. Slowly the regeneration of endometrium takes place, okay, and it increases to a certain stage until when? Until the ovulation happens. Once the ovulation has happened and we have the corpus luteum, you can see we have the corpus luteum. Once we have the corpus luteum, they produce progesterone, and progesterone strongly influences the maturation and the organization of your endometrium. So the endometrium becomes thick, vascularized, means more blood supply is happening for the endometrium, and it becomes it starts secreting glycoproteins and glycolipids, okay, onto the surface, so that it is expecting the implantation. Once the corpus luteum degenerates, it becomes corpus albicans. Progesterone levels will drop. Integrity of the endometrium is gone. So that is why it will start breaking, and it will start menses or the bleeding phase. So these are the events that is happening in the uterus. So let us see what is happening in the ovary. In ovary, what happens after the bleeding phase? You can quickly see that already the follicles are starting to develop because of the hormones that are secreted. Okay, follicular stimulating hormone acts strongly on this developing follicles, primary follicles are maturing into secondary follicles, and secondary follicles are developing into tertiary follicles. By the mid-cycle, we have, Graafian follicles. Graafian follicles will rupture, leading to ovulation. Here, these follicles are very responsible for production of estrogen. In the absence of follicles, what happens? The cortical cells of the ovary will be producing estrogen instead of the follicular cells. Okay. Now, once these follicles are, once the Graafian follicle is burst and it leads to ovulation, the remnants of the follicles, they become corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum is essential for production of your progesterone. Okay. And then the degeneration of corpus luteum takes place in the failure of fertilization, and then it will become corpus albicans. Okay. So this is the developments that is happening with respect to ovary throughout the phase. Now, coming to ovarian hormones, you can see here, as the follicles are developing, slowly the estrogen levels will pick up, and the estrogen levels are at the peak when it is got secondary follicles and tertiary follicles or Graafian follicles. Now, after the rupture of the Graafian follicle, the estrogen levels will drop because of the destruction of the follicles. Okay. Now, again, slowly the estrogen levels will pick up. Why the estrogen levels will pick up? Because the endometrium is very well developing, first one, and the entire body is preparing for the implantation and pregnancy. And these hormones, at this phase, the estrogen is produced by the cortical cells of the ovary. Now, once you have the failure of the pregnancy, the cortical cells will stop, will decrease their levels of estrogen, and they slowly synthesize very minimal amount of our estrogen. Okay. So that is about estrogen. Look at progesterone. Progesterone is produced by our corpus luteum. Since there is no corpus luteum, minimum levels of progesterone are produced by the ovaries, okay, throughout the mid-cycle. Once you have the ovulation and the corpus luteum formation takes place, so this endocrine body starts producing progesterone, which is very responsible for maintaining the integrity of your, endometrium lining. Now, what will happen? Once the degeneration of the corpus luteum takes place and it forms corpus albicans, slowly the progesterone levels will drop down. So that will lead to degeneration of endometrium. Okay. Coming to pituitary hormones, we have two hormones. One is luteinizing hormone, other one is follicular stimulating hormone. See the follicular stimulating hormone. So once you have the development of corpus albicans, that is the sign for another cycle. So that is why after the formation of corpus albicans, the follicular stimulating hormones are slowly increased here. So this increase in follicular stimulating hormone leads to the development of follicles. That is, maturation of follicles will happen. Okay. So as the follicles mature, the levels of the follicular stimulating hormones remain constant, and slowly it increases when during the maturation process of secondary follicle to the tertiary follicle. So at the mid-cycle, during the ovulation, there is small peak of the follicular stimulating hormone. Once the follicles are burst open, now the follicular stimulating hormone drops, and the hormone remains consistent or constant levels, or minor amounts of follicular stimulating hormones are released until the end of degeneration. Until the beginning of the degeneration of endometrium. Understood? Next one we have is luteinizing hormone. The levels of luteinizing hormone is very consistent throughout the cycle, but at the mid-cycle, the luteinizing hormones peaks very, very high amounts. That leads to the rupture of Graafian follicle, resulting in ovulation. So this peak in luteinizing hormone is called as LH surge. LH stands for luteinizing hormone. Surge is the peaking of luteinizing hormone. Understood? So once you have a surge, that leads to ovulation. Once the ovulation is complete, immediately there is a drop in luteinizing hormone, and it remains stagnant throughout the cycle. So this is about some of the events that is happening in ovary, ovarian hormones, endometrium, and the pituitary hormones, etc. Okay. So some of the disorders of menstrual cycles are, we have amenorrhea. Amenorrhea is when the women cannot menstruate or absence of menstrual cycle. So that can be of many reasons, either because of uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, or because of menopause, or because of hormonal regulations. So that is called as amenorrhea. And then we have dysamenorrhea, when people have very painful menstrual cycles, because some of their endometrium will be very well developed because of excessive progesterone. So when this breaking happens, there will be very severe contractions that is happening. So that will cause painful menstruation cycle. We have menorrhagia, menorrhagia. Menorrhagia is called as excessive menstruation. So excessive menstruation is some of the people have multiple cycles of menstruation within the same month, or they have very prolonged menstruation cycle, that is for 10 days or 12 days, they'll be bleeding. Okay. Then we have metal schismers. So this is called as metal schismers. Small amount of blood is lost at the time of ovulation. So this is called as metal schismers. So these are some of the aspects of female reproductive systems and menstrual cycle. Next one, we have to go for fertilization and implantation, which is the last portion of our class. But unfortunately, we are running out of time. Okay, people. I hope you understood, because I have to take the class very fast. We have 1 hour time to finish a large chunk of the portion. Please remember the testis, detrusor muscles, and dartus muscles, which is helping in movement of the testis. And remember the functions of Sertoli cells, Leydig cells, okay, and hormone regulation, and events that is happening in the menstrual cycle, and the production of acrosome by the Golgi apparatus. These are very, very important for examination point of view. And also refer all the given label diagrams in your textbook and go through the labelings very thoroughly. Many questions might come in such a fashion. All right, students. So thank you very much. We're going to end the session now. If you have any doubts, you can ask now. Okay. I'll be here for some time.